Hello everyone, I see that you have returned for more discussion on the book of Deuteronomy. We're in Deuteronomy chapter 8 today. We're going to try to talk about it in 5 minutes. First, we need to talk about when the events of this chapter happened. If you've already done the first 7 chapters, nothing new here. We are still in about 1450 BC. These speeches of Moses's to the children of Israel, these are being recorded immediately after the children of Israel finish their 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, and they're just about to cross the Jordan River and go in and conquer the Promised Land. Our characters are going to be the Israelites, the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They were slaves in Egypt for hundreds of years, but they grew into a really large nation during that time. And then God, through the 10 plagues, delivered them, gave them their freedom. He gave them a special law at Mount Sinai that they were supposed to live by. And now their leader, Moses, who's our second main character, he has led them to the borders of the Canaan land, this land that they were promised to be able to live in, promises made all the way back during the time of their forefathers, those guys that we mentioned, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Joseph too. You know, he never makes the list, but he's in there too. In terms of our map, we mentioned that the Israelites were slaves in Egypt. You can see that around the left side of the map. They went all the way down to Mount Sinai, or Mount Horeb, as it's also known. Down, you can see at the bottom of the map, that's kind of the traditional location of Mount Sinai. There's some debate about that. But now they've gone up to the place, well, you see that little mountain there, Pisgah, between the Amorite lands and the land of Moab. They're right around that mountain, Mount Pisgah, and that's where Moses is speaking to the Israelites before they cross the Jordan River and go into Canaan. So moving on over to page number 2, our first section, verses 1 through 10, I've entitled it God's Discipline and Provision for Israel in the Wilderness. So Moses wanted Israel to remember how God had humbled them in the wilderness. Why did they have to wander in the wilderness for 40 years? Do you remember? Well, it's because they were faithless. When God brought them to Canaan the first time, they sent those spies into the land, and they came back and they're like, oh, boo-hoo, we're not strong enough to take the land. Moses, God, why'd you bring us out here to die? And they didn't have faith that God was going to empower them to take the land. So God cursed them, and he said, you're going to wander in the wilderness for 40 years, and then maybe you'll get the chance to try again, right? So they needed to be humbled, and this was the punishment that God gave to them. But during this punishment and through this process of humiliation, God provided for them, and he taught them that he was going to be their sustainer. He was going to be the one who cared for them. And that was going to be a lesson that they needed to know they needed to keep that in mind forever, for generations to come. God provided for them in the wilderness in several ways. One of those ways was the food that he gave them every day to eat. Remember what it was called? Manna, this bread type stuff that appeared on the ground every single day. He fed them with this heavenly bread to teach them, quote, that man does not live by bread alone, but man lives by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. Deuteronomy 8, verse 3. God also tells us that he kept their sandals from wearing out during their journey, right? So their clothes weren't getting old and needing to be replaced all the time while they were in the wilderness, and that was God's doing. And they were also promised that at the end of their journey, there would be a land of rich blessing for them. So I want to read verses 7 through 10 where Moses describes this blessing for them, this place that God had prepared for them. For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land, a land of brooks of water, of fountains and springs flowing out of the valleys and hills, a land of wheat and barley. Oh, my computer just went to sleep. A land of, where are we? A land of wheat and barley, of vines and figs, trees and pomegranates, a land of olive trees and honey, a land in which you will eat bread without scarcity, in which you will lack nothing, a land whose stones are iron, and out of whose hills you can dig copper. And you shall eat and be full, and you shall bless the Lord your God for the good land he has given you. Right? So they have to go through this period of humbling and humiliation and punishment, but God's going to teach them along the way that he's going to provide for them, and they're going to know that certainly when they reach the end and this land is waiting for them. But as Moses discusses these blessings, he also, in section number 2, verses 11 through 20, he warns them about complacency and pride. So, as he had previously, Moses warned the Israelites not to forget God when they received this land of blessing and this home of comfort. He knew that they would be tempted to become complacent when they lived in their new homes and they had plenty to eat and they enjoyed the riches of the Canaan land, the Promised Land. Moses knew how easy it was to forget God when life is easy, and that's certainly true still today. He also wanted to warn them about the potential of pride corrupting their hearts and corrupting their memories of the events that actually occurred. He told them to take care lest they start to believe that their blessings were a result of their own strength and their own doing. Moses did not want them to forget that it was God who gave them freedom from the Egyptians, that it was God who led them safely through the dangerous wilderness, it was God who gave them water in the desert, it was God who gave them food in the desert when they were hungry, and gave them victories over their enemies in Canaan, enemies who were greater than themselves. If Israel forgot God, God promised to drive them out of the promised land like the nations that they were about to drive out. Right? They were going to lose that land if they didn't obey God. For our application, I want to return to this idea that it's easy to forget God when things are good in our lives. Moses said to the Israelites, quote, "Beware lest you say in your heart, my power and the might of my hand have gotten me this wealth. You shall remember the Lord your God, for it is He who gives you power to get wealth." The temptation to believe that our money, that our possessions, that our success are the result of our own ingenuity and our own, maybe business acumen, our own talents, our own smarts, that temptation is still powerful in the 21st century. And I think this is probably part of the reason that Jesus, in the model prayer in Luke chapter 11, tells his disciples to ask God for their daily bread. Because no matter how rich we are, we need to remember that our wealth and even our daily necessities come from God, and they're not guaranteed to be there tomorrow. So remembering to ask God every single day for something to eat is a daily reminder of our dependence on Him, and it's also a protection against the pride of thinking that we're doing this on our own.